It's a comment that turned heads on Sunday, the 4th anniversary of Syria's uprising.
You'd be willing to negotiate with him?
Well, we have to negotiate in the end.
Contemplating airstrikes against Damascus. With no light at the end of the tunnel, the U.S. Secretary of State seemingly catching his French and UK allies off guard with that statement, you're going to have to negotiate. Has Assad succeeded in reducing his country's civil war basically into a binary choice between himself and ISIS? What message to those caught in places like Aleppo, where a three-way fight with both government forces and the jihadists still rages? And what of the timing? At the start of a week of crucial negotiations over Tehran's nuclear ambitions, is Syria already factored in as part of a grander bargain between the U.S. and Iran? Today, in the France 24 debate, does the West talk to Assad? With us from Geneva, a longtime Syrian dissident who's been privy to many negotiations these past 4 years, Haitham Mana of the Scandinavian Institute of Human Rights. Always a pleasure to have you, sir.
Thank you.
Joining us here in the studio, Paris Match deputy editor Régis Le Sommier, recently back from Damascus, where you interviewed Syria's president. Thanks for being with us. Also joining us, Newsweek's Middle East editor Janine Di Giovanni, who's been the other side of the border in Iraq recently.
Yes.
And he's a former U.S. diplomat who was stationed in Damascus. William Jordan, nice to have you back on the show. The France 24 debate, where you can join the conversation on Facebook and Twitter, our hashtag F24debate. Now, the State Department spokesperson later insisted there's no change in U.S. policy and, quote, there's no future for a brutal dictator like Assad in Syria. But there is. In his interview with U.S. network CBS, Kerry no longer talking up the boosting of the moderate rebels, it seems.
We are working very hard with other interested parties to see if we can reignite a diplomatic outcome. Why? Because everybody agrees there is no military solution. There is only a political solution. But to get the Assad regime to negotiate, we're going to have to make it clear to him that there is a determination by everybody to seek that political outcome and change his calculation about negotiating. That's underway right now. And I am convinced that with the efforts of our allies and others, there will be increased pressure on Assad.
And you'd be willing to negotiate with him?
Well, we have to negotiate.
Well, we have to negotiate with him. William Jordan, were you caught off guard by those remarks?
No. In fact, I wish everybody would just take a chill pill. Because, in fact, John Kerry has not deviated that much from the standard talking points. In fact, I saw the latest set of talking points late last week, marking the 4th anniversary of the outbreak of what became the Syrian civil war. And those points make very clear and emphasize over and over that the only way out, and this has been the long-standing U.S. position, is a negotiated resolution of this conflict, and now a civil war.
Yeah, but when, for instance, they were talking in Geneva, the U.S. was saying, first Assad has to go.
Well, there are the Geneva principles, and nothing that John Kerry said yesterday contradicts any of that, any of those preconditions or any of those, if you will, absolute requirements in order to have some kind of a negotiated departure for the Assad regime. I mean, to me, yes, some of the directness with which Kerry said what he did may have been a bit surprising, but what he actually said in substance doesn't constitute any significant change in the U.S. position as far as I'm concerned.
Régis Le Sommier, is that the way you read it?
I mean, it's coming on the very anniversary of the uprising in Syria, so it didn't, it didn't say that, he didn't say that out of the blue, you know. I think it's carefully calculated. Of course, there's a talk with Iran on the nuclear today issue. There's also the offensive on Tikrit, which is led by the Iranian. And all this, you know, it comes in a major game, and there's a bigger game than only the serious question. Now, it is definitely a shift because as you pointed, the departure of Assad was a precondition to any form of talk with the regime. I mean, and first there was no talk with the regime, then some element of the regime, and now it's directly talking to Assad. So there's definitely a shift in that. The truth is, the fighting situation is at a standstill. Everybody's trying. I mean, the United Nations is trying to bring some sort of relief to Aleppo, especially, but there's no major gain on the ground, and it's been like that for quite a while. So, if there is a solution to be found, well, there's going to be at some point they're going to have to talk with the regime itself and to Assad.
Jenny Giovanni?
Well, I agree with William in the sense that there really isn't a deviation from Geneva II. I was at Geneva I, Geneva II. I've worked on both sides of the regime and the rebel side in Syria, as well as the Iraqi conflict, the ISIS conflict. And I think that Kerry is sticking to what he has always said, which is a very wishy-washy approach to it. I think the fact that this is such a betrayal to the Syrian people. That is the main point. And coming this week on the 4th anniversary, when they're basically sandwiched between a regime that is battering them and ISIS. And the revelations last week, which is something we've always known, that ISIS and Daesh and Assad were working together on the oil deals, and the EU putting sanctions on them. It just shows that, in a sense, he had a vested interest all along of going along with what ISIS is doing, which is destroying the Free Syrian Army. I think that, of course, we do have to deal with Assad. He is part of the equation. But more importantly, I think more pressure should be put on the external players, on Russia, on Iran, who...
On Turkey.
On Turkey. Yeah.
Turkey, yes, but Turkey has, in a sense, I mean, they've opened their borders and let jihadists cross. But really, I think the key here is Iran. And it is interesting what you brought up, the timing of all this, of Kerry's announcement, if you want to call it that, in the same week that he is negotiating in the final phases of the nuclear deal.
Haitham Manat, do you agree that we're witnessing a fundamental shift?
I'm sorry, I didn't hear everything because of the parasite of the Arabic 24. I heard both. But I can tell you that Kerry yesterday said over the table what happened under the table. And we know all that the majority of regional and international forces today don't think that a military solution is possible. And they agreed with us what we said since 3 years, that there is only a political solution for the Syrian crisis. And now I think that the problem is that the old continent, that's mean Little Britain and old-fashioned France, cannot accept the idea that US now don't have any other solution.
Haitham Manat, the French foreign minister,
Laurent, to discuss with Assad or not. Assad himself composed the delegation of the Syrian government for Geneva II, and all of us know that. Why this hypocrisy to speak about he will not participate or he will participate? Al-Muallim came because Assad asked him to come,
the foreign minister,
to Geneva II. And the same thing will happen for Geneva III, for any political negotiation based in Geneva Communique. And this, I think this idea that with or without Assad is not the essential today. The essential today, we are living in a dirty war. And this war now is not only Syrian, it is regional.
But Haitham Manat, let me ask you to react. Haitham Manat,
yes,
the French
yes.
the French foreign minister, Laurent Fabius, his reaction just a few hours ago in Brussels was to say putting Assad back in the saddle would be a scandalous gift to ISIS. Do you agree?
You know, I said to you 2 years before that the knowledge of your Minister of Foreign Affairs is like my knowledge in Chinese. Unfortunately, now the foreign policy of France is under development vis-à-vis the region. You send some weapons, arms to the moderated opposition. Now 80% of these arms are in the hand of al-Nusra. And you know that. Stop hypocrisy and stop to speak about free army is beautiful. The coalition is the only representative of the Syrian people. This disc is old, very old now. We are in another era, and this era will be in the conference of Cairo next month of the majority of the opposition, the democratic opposition, to form a delegation, a real representative and equilibrium delegation for negotiation based in Geneva Communique.
All right, we've
and
seen.
The French cannot understand that the Syrian opposition now in this step.
Right, Régis Sommier.
I agree with what your guests just said about the position of the French diplomacy regarding Syria and the whole region in general, especially to Syria. There is this at the front of the fight against Assad, which has been the position of Laurent Fabius, is something really hard to grasp. When I was in Damascus in November, in late November, there were a lot of, not a lot, but there were a few Americans around, you know, and I went through the neighborhood where the embassy was, and they were sort of like cleaning the U.S. embassy. There were some people fixing things, which was not the case of the French embassy and, of course, the Saudi Arabia embassy, which are nearby. So they showed me that. I don't know if they did it purposely in order to show me, you know, that it was that there might be a possibility that the U.S. embassy might reopen. I don't know about that, but definitely there were some U.S. members, and a French parliamentary noticed the same thing when he went more recently to Damascus. So people are doing business over there. They're going, you know, there are already ties. So why is
according
France?
to French newspaper Le Figaro, those ties date way back, much earlier than we think, way before those coalition airstrikes.
Absolutely. The link has always been there. With the French diplomatic position, the link has been severe. There has been a complete cut, which is now to our cost, because security-wise, we would like to have some form of at least talk about the current flow of jihadists coming to Syria. We would like to have some information. Definitely our intelligence service, our defense minister want to know more. And without any ties with the Syrian government, you can't have those informations. So I think there is something that is hard to grasp with the current French diplomatic position regarding Syria.
All right, lots of reactions coming in. One on Twitter: no choice but to talk to Assad as U.S.-led policy in the Middle East unravels whole region. How different is his regime to U.S. ally Saudi Arabia anyway? Another interesting point, William Jordan, on last Friday, there was the head of the CIA who made remarks before the Council on Foreign Relations, John Brennan, saying the last thing we want to do is allow the jihadists to march into Damascus. Otherwise put, he's saying our top priority is the jihadists. Assad is second on our list.
Well, that's absolutely true. I mean, that's been one of the problems for the U.S. policy for a long time, is that we don't have a clear strategy. We have not had a clear way
and as a
forward.
result, as Janine Giovanni was saying, we're rewarding Assad for giving that wide berth to the jihadists at the beginning of the uprising.
Well, that may be. I mean, again, going back to the very beginning, I think we made a lot of miscalculations as far as Assad himself was concerned, and his willingness to deal with the opposition and to try to come to some sort of a peaceful resolution of what was escalating and becoming a more and more violent conflict. But I think that over time, I mean, the dithering in Washington over whether or not to arm the rebels, how to arm the rebels, trying to screen the rebels, which rebels, the fact that the Syrian opposition has never been able to coalesce as a viable, meaningful organization in itself, What has happened with the rise of the Islamic State is that now that's all Washington is focused on, much like Europe. And in my view, for far less valid reasons than Europe, which has this threat on its doorstep. For the United States, this is a much more vapid, much less clear-cut threat to the United States. The United States has been sucked into leading a coalition of, I hate to say it, contradictory and disharmonious elements. And the only common denominator is fighting ISIS. Or fighting IS. We have lost sight of what's going on in Syria. And to bring it all back around, I mean, whatever all of this stuff is about, secret agents going back in, the embassy being cleaned up and all the rest of it, the point is the United States is keeping an arm's length from the Assad regime, but because it has no other way forward, what I think Kerry, what I believe Kerry, based on the talking points that I've seen, is trying to do is he's trying to go back to Geneva. He's trying to find some kind of an internationally led, UN-led process. He's using the royal we in a way that makes it sound like we, the United States, but he means the international community.
And by the way, the Syrian television going big on the story this Monday with President Assad himself talking of the need to rein in, quote, terrorists.
We are always hearing comments like this. We're waiting to see actions. We've had no choice since the very first day. If these changes are positive and concrete, then we welcome them. But they need to stop financing terrorists, stop sending weapons, and stop putting pressure on European countries to do the same.
Giovanni?
Remember one thing, though, when Assad and the regime speak of terrorists, they mean anyone that opposes them. They don't just mean ISIS, Nusra, they mean anyone. They used to call the Free Syrian Army terrorists. I think one thing we have to think of now, we're now entering the 5th year. There's 220,000 people that have been killed. We all know the statistics, 4 million refugees outside the country, 9 million displaced inside. Where do we go from here? How do we end a war? If we take this as a modern template of a war, can we use examples such as, let's say, Bosnia, the Dayton Peace Accords? Richard Holbrooke basically bullied Milosevic into ending that war and rewarded a dictator and a killer and froze front lines, but ended the violence. And I think now this is what people are beginning to look at. At what stage do we now say we need to end the violence? Staffan de Mistura, the UN Special Envoy, as we know, is the 3rd Special Envoy behind Kofi Annan and Brahimi, both veteran diplomats who've ended other wars. They failed. He can't even, de Mistura's been trying to get a freeze in Aleppo. He hasn't been able to pass that for one day.
All right, the violence isn't working. I'm going to have to cut you off because we have to take a quick break. I want to pick up on this point. Stay with us. You're watching the France 24 debate.